My cat brought a present this morning, and it's from the neighbor's house. My cat, Mr. Muffin, has always had a peculiar way of showing affection, often bringing me the usual assortment of critters he'd catch. But one day, he surprised me with something entirely different. A piece of jewelry. A necklace, in fact. Curious and slightly amused by the discovery, I wondered where he could have possibly found it. Life went on, and the necklace slipped my mind until I spotted Mrs. Grant, my neighbor, tending to her garden. Mrs. Grant had been a bit odd lately, sparking various rumors among the neighbors. It clicked then. Could the necklace belong to her, or did she know whose it might be? I approached her, the piece of jewelry in hand. Her reaction was one of shock and nervousness, a reaction so intense it raised questions. She claimed the necklace, but hastily requested I keep Mr. Muffin from her property. The situation felt off, especially after discussing it with another neighbor, Larry, who also sensed something strange about Mrs. Grant's demeanor. Nevertheless, I agreed to Mrs. Grant's request, intending to keep Mr. Muffin indoors. But cats will be cats, and Mr. Muffin slipped away, returning not long after with another mysterious item, a golden ring. Convinced now that my cat had taken up jewel theft, I followed him into Mrs. Grant's yard in an attempt to curb his newfound hobby. What I discovered there, however, was far from what I had expected. Mr. Muffin was digging at a spot in the garden, and my curiosity turned to horror as we unearthed not another piece of jewelry but the remains of a person. Panic set in as I realized it was Mrs. Grant, or at least someone who looked very much like her. The situation escalated quickly. Hearing footsteps from the house, I made a hasty retreat, injuring myself in the process. From my hiding spot, I witnessed a chilling scene. Another figure, resembling Mrs. Grant, approached and inspected the grave with unsettling interest. Fleeing home, I reported the incident to the police, but their investigation yielded nothing, and the real Mrs. Grant, or so she claimed, even lodged a complaint against me. Recovering at home, the bizarre events seemed to have concluded until one evening. A disturbance from Mr. Muffin alerted me to a visitor. Mrs. Grant, offering soup in concern, but her voice, initially warm, shifted into something unrecognizable and sinister. As I sit here, contemplating my next move, the fear and uncertainty grip me tightly. The ringing of the doorbell, the altered voice of Mrs. Grant, and the unexplained events leave me trapped in a nightmare, wishing I had never let Mr. Muffin out that day. Follow for part 2.